My son poured a plate of scalding chili over my head, right in the middle of our family dinner. I felt the liquid burn my scalp, slide, scorching, down my forehead, soaking my grey hair that I had styled so carefully that afternoon. Pieces of ground beef and beans fell onto my shoulders. The smell of the chili mingled with my expensive perfume. And the worst part wasn't the physical pain. The worst part was the silence. 20 pairs of eyes were staring at me. No one moved. No one said a word. My son, Matthew, slowly stood up, with that twisted smile he had perfected over 45 years of getting everything without effort. He pointed at the door with his accusing finger. "You have 10 minutes to get out of my house," he said. His voice sounded theatrical, rehearsed. 10 minutes to get out of my family. Paige, my daughter-in-law, that woman of fake smiles and empty hugs, remained seated, motionless. And then she started to applaud. Slowly at first, then louder. Other guests joined in. The applause echoed in my ears like a funeral bell. I wiped my face with the napkin. I took a deep breath. 67 years of humiliation condensed into a single moment, but something inside me didn't break. It hardened. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. I threw it onto the table. The documents scattered among the dirty plates and lit candles. "That's right," I said in an icy voice. 10 minutes, and everything that is yours will be gone. Tell me if your own family ever betrayed you when you were most vulnerable. But to understand how I arrived at this moment, with chili dripping from my hair and vengeance in my hands, I need to take you back, way back, to when I was just an invisible girl in a house full of voices that never said my name with love. I grew up knowing I wasn't enough, that I would never be enough. My brother Matthew was the sun around which our family revolved. I was barely a shadow in the corner. Every achievement of his was celebrated as if he had discovered the cure for cancer. He would pull a C in math, and my mother Marilyn would organize special dinners. He would win a school football game, and my father Elias would invite the neighbors over to celebrate. I would bring home straight A's and receive a distracted sentiment. I would win science competitions and get a very good Teresa, without them looking up from the newspaper. I remember one Christmas. I was 11 years old. Matthew received a new bicycle, bright red, with gears. He had been asking for it for months. He screamed with excitement. He hugged Mum. The photographs of that moment still exist in some album that I never opened again. I received a knitted sweater, 2 sizes too big, mustard yellow, used. It smelled of mothballs. It had a stain on the sleeve. I smiled and said thank you, because that was what was expected of me. Always be grateful. Always be invisible. Matthew wrecked that bike in 3 months. He left it out in the rain. He abandoned it in the garage until it rusted. But he already had something new. There was always something new for Matthew. The only person who truly saw me was my grandfather, Robert. When I entered a room, his eyes would light up. When I spoke, he listened to every word as if it were sacred poetry. "Teresa," he would say as we walked through his rose and jasmine garden, "you have fire in your eyes. Don't let anyone put it out." I was 13 years old the first time he told me that. I didn't fully understand it then, but I kept those words like a secret treasure. Grandfather Robert had been a surgeon, one of the best of his generation. Retired by the time I was born, he kept his medical books on oak shelves in his study. He would let me look through them, sit in his worn leather armchair, dream of impossible futures for an invisible girl. "Do you want to be a doctor, Teresa?" he asked me one day. "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "I want to be remembered for something important." He smiled, that smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Then you will be." And when you succeed, they will understand what they let slip away. But my family never understood. At 18 years old, I was accepted into college to study medicine, full scholarship for my exceptional grades. My mother barely looked up from her magazine. "That's nice," she said, with that flat tone she used for everything about me. "You'll be very busy then." My father grumbled something about how difficult it would be. Matthew scoffed. He said I would probably drop out in the first semester because women weren't suited for those things. Grandfather Robert took me out to dinner at a fancy restaurant. Just the two of us. We toasted with orange juice because I wasn't old enough for wine. "To Dr. Teresa," he said, raising his glass, "the woman who will show the world what she is made of." I cried that night in my room. Not out of sadness. Out of a strange mix of gratitude and pain. Gratitude for having at least one person who believed in me. Pain because that person shouldn't be the exception. College years were brutal. I studied until my eyes burned. I worked night shifts at coffee shops. I slept 4 hours a night. Every time I felt I couldn't go on, I remembered grandfather's words, the fire in my eyes. I couldn't let it go out. Matthew entered college to study business administration. My parents paid every cent. They bought him a new car. They rented him apartments near campus. He failed the first year 3 times. Parties, alcohol, girlfriends who changed every month. My parents justified every failure. "He's finding his way," Mum would say. "Boys need time," Dad would add. I graduated with honours in 6 years. Matthew took 9 years to finish a 5-year degree, but when he finally did, the party was the event of the year. More than 100 guests, hired ballroom, live music, 3-layer cake. When I graduated from medical school, Grandfather Robert took me out to dinner. Just the two of us. My parents were busy with I don't remember what. Matthew didn't answer my call. "Teresa," Grandfather told me that night, his eyes shining with pride, "remember this always. True family is not the one that shares your blood. It's the one that recognizes your light when everyone else is blind." I didn't know then that those words would be prophetic. That decades later, on a night of hot chili and public humiliation, those words would ring out like bells of justice. Medical residency was my personal hell. 36 hours straight at the hospital, hands trembling with exhaustion as I stitched wounds. Life or death decisions with cold coffee as my only fuel. There were times when my body simply begged to give up. But I didn't give up. Every patient saved was a victory against everyone who said I couldn't. Every time a patient took my hand and thanked me with tears, I felt that my existence had purpose, beyond being the forgotten daughter. Grandfather Robert visited me when he could. He brought homemade food in plastic containers, which I devoured between shifts. He would sit in the hospital cafeteria for hours, just waiting for me to have 10 minutes free. "I'm proud of you," he always told me. "More than words can express." I needed to hear that. I needed it like air. Because at home, when I visited on my scarce days off, the conversation always revolved around Matthew and his business ventures. He had decided to be an entrepreneur. He didn't want to work for anyone. He was destined to be a boss, not an employee. My parents felt admiration and gave him $50,000 as initial investment. A sportswear store that went bankrupt in 8 months. He lost everything in unsold inventory and an overly expensive location. But my parents simply said it was part of the learning process. They gave him another $30,000 for his next idea. A mobile app for food delivery. Before those apps were popular. He could have been a visionary if Matthew had the slightest idea about technology. He hired cheap programmers, faulty product, advertising without the service working. 6 months and everything collapsed. I finished my residency and started specialization in cardiovascular surgery, one of the most difficult fields, most demanding, most competitive. I chose it exactly for that reason. I wanted to be where the mediocre couldn't reach. I spent 4 more years perfecting technique. I studied with the best. I attended international conferences, paying for my own tickets. I read every new paper that was published. I became a sponge that absorbed knowledge as if my life depended on it. It worked. At 38 years old, I was offered a position at one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country, not just as a surgeon, as chief of cardiovascular surgery, recognition that doctors with 20 years more experience dreamed of receiving. I called my family. My hands were trembling. For once, I thought that maybe they would say something meaningful, that they would acknowledge that their invisible daughter had achieved something extraordinary. My mother answered, "Teresa, what a surprise. Is something wrong?" "No, Mum. Quite the opposite. I was named Chief of Cardiovascular Surgery at Metropolitan General Hospital. It's one of the most important positions in the country." Silence. So long that I thought the call had been disconnected. "Mum, are you there?" Yes, that's great, honey. Congratulations. Hey, can I call you back? We're organizing dinner for Matthew. He got investors for his new company. We want to celebrate big." I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat on the floor of my empty apartment. I cried until I was dry. 38 years old, and I was still hoping for something different. I was still hoping to be seen. Grandfather Robert called that same night. He always had a sixth sense for knowing when I needed him. "Teresa, my brilliant girl, your mother told me about your appointment. She should have kissed the ground you walk on. What you have achieved is extraordinary." "They don't care, Grandpa," I said with a broken voice. "They never have cared." "I know, my love. But there is something you must understand. Their indifference does not define your worth. You are valuable for what you built with your own hands, with your own brain, with your own heart. And when the time is right, they will understand what they lost. I promise you." I didn't understand then what the right time meant. But Grandfather Robert always spoke in riddles about the future. Matthew lost all the money from those investors in less than a year. His consulting company was barely disguised fraud. He promised results never delivered. He charged absurd fees for generic advice from the internet. The investors sued him. My parents paid the out-of-court settlement with $40,000 more. Matthew never faced real consequences. He never did. He met Paige during that time. She worked in public relations. She was beautiful. Her brown hair always perfect. A practiced smile, impeccable manners. The type of woman who knows how to behave in every situation. From the first moment, I knew she was fake. But Matthew was enchanted. He had finally found someone who fed his ego as much as our parents. They got married in an extravagant ceremony, more than $100,000, all paid for by Marilyn and Elias. I was invited as an obligation. They seated me at a table in the back, far from the immediate family, next to distant cousins I hadn't seen in years. During the toast, my father spoke for 15 minutes about how proud he was of his son. "Matthew has overcome obstacles," he said with an emotional voice. "He has fallen and gotten back up. Obstacles that they paid to resolve, falls that they cushioned with money. But no one mentioned those details." Grandfather Robert was sitting next to me. He squeezed my hand under the table when he saw my eyes tear up. "Patience," he whispered. "Everything comes in its time." Matthew and Paige moved into a house my parents helped them buy. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, large yard in an upper-middle-class neighborhood. More than most people could dream of having at 30 years old. I, who earned 4 times more than Matthew in his best months, had bought my own apartment years ago. I paid for it alone. Every cent from my own account. It was smaller than my brother's house, but it was mine, completely mine. Years passed. My career continued to ascend. I published papers in international medical journals. I was invited as a speaker in Boston, London, Tokyo. I performed surgeries that other doctors considered impossible. I saved lives that others had given up on. I appeared in medical documentaries. I was interviewed on news programs as an expert. My face became recognizable in professional circles. Young doctors sought my advice. Students wanted to train under my supervision. My family? They barely noticed. When I appeared on a national TV program talking about advances in heart transplants, my mother commented that my hairstyle was unflattering. My father said I spoke too fast. Matthew didn't even watch the show. Grandfather Robert recorded it on VHS. He watched it 3 times. Someday, he told me during one of our private dinners, they will want to boast that you are their daughter. They will tell everyone that the famous Dr. Teresa is their family. And when that day comes, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember who was here when you were invisible. Matthew continued to sink into his own failures while I reaped successes. But his ego never diminished. If anything, it grew proportionally to every financial disaster, as if reality couldn't touch him, always protected by the infinite cushion of our parents' money. After the consulting fiasco, he decided to become a real estate developer. He convinced Paige to quit her stable job to join his venture. "We're going to be millionaires," he promised her with that blind confidence that only the incompetent possess. My parents gave him $60,000 for the first project. An old house in a declining neighborhood that, according to Matthew, had incredible potential. He hired cheap workers, terrible work. The remodeling took 3 times longer than planned. It cost twice the budget. When he tried to sell it, the market had changed. He had to sell at a loss. But Matthew had explanations for everything. The economy had been against him. The workers betrayed him. The agent was incompetent. It was never his fault. Never. I watched him from afar. From my world of successful surgeries and professional recognition, I felt a mixture of pity and repulsion. Pity because it was pathetic to see a 40-year-old man depending on his parents like a teenager. Repulsion because he never showed humility or gratitude. There was a time when I was 43 years old that I tried to reach out. I thought that maybe if I offered him genuine help, we could build something resembling a real sibling relationship. I called him one Tuesday afternoon. "Matthew, I heard you're looking for new opportunities. I have contacts in hospital administration. There are managerial positions that might interest you. Real, stable work, good salary." He laughed. A dry, cruel laugh. "Real work? You mean being someone's employee? Teresa, I'm not made to be a common worker. I'm an entrepreneur, a visionary. You can't understand it because you're just a glorified employee who cuts up bodies for money." I hung up without responding. That was the last time I tried to help him. The last time I extended an olive branch that he burned before I could touch it. Grandfather Robert was already 87 years old. His health was starting to deteriorate. Heart problems. Ironically, my field of specialty. I personally reviewed all his studies. I consulted with the best cardiologists in the country. I made sure he received the best possible treatment. I spent every free moment with him. We would have dinner at his house where he would tell stories of when he was young, of his own revolutionary surgeries, of patients he remembered decades later. He talked to me about my grandmother, who passed away before I was born, with love so pure it made me believe that true love existed. "Teresa," he told me one night as we drank tea in his living room full of antique books, "I need to talk to you about something important." His voice sounded different, more serious, more urgent. "What's wrong, Grandpa? Are you feeling sick? Do you need me to call the cardiologist?" "No, my girl. It's not that. It's about the future. My future. Or rather, the absence of it." My blood ran cold. "Don't talk like that. You still have many years left." "Teresa, I am a doctor. You are a doctor. We both know how to read the signs. My heart is tired. And that's okay. I've lived a long and mostly happy life. But I need to make sure that when I'm gone, things are left the way they should be." He pulled an envelope from the drawer of his nightstand. Plain, sealed with red wax, like in old movies. My name written on the front in his elegant handwriting. "This envelope is for you, only for you. When I pass away, my lawyer Anthony will formally deliver it to you, but I want you to know now that it exists. Do not open it until that moment. Promise me." "Grandpa, please. Promise me, Teresa." Tears rolled down my cheeks. "I promise you." Inside there are important documents, instructions, things I prepared for years. Your family will be upset. Your mother, your father, especially Matthew. But everything I did with full conscience and for reasons that will become very clear. "What's in the envelope?" "Justice," he simply replied. "Delayed justice." I didn't understand then, but I kept that envelope in my personal safe. I tried not to think about it too much. Thinking meant accepting that Grandfather Robert was really preparing to leave. 6 months later, on a cold November morning, I received the call I had feared. Grandfather Robert had passed away during the night, peacefully, asleep, without pain. His heart simply stopped, tired after 88 years of beating. I cried for 3 days. I cried in my apartment. I cried at the hospital between surgeries. I cried while driving aimlessly through the city. I had lost the only person who truly loved me, the only person who saw me whole. The funeral was strange. My parents cried, but their tears seemed performative. Matthew looked annoyed, as if the funeral were an inconvenience in his schedule. Paige stayed by his side, whispering things in his ear, looking at her phone when she thought no one was watching. I sat in the front row, dark grey dress, eyes swollen from crying so much. I held Grandfather's hand in the open casket before the service, still warm. I leaned down and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Grandpa. For seeing me, for loving me, for teaching me that my worth doesn't depend on them." After the service, Grandfather's lawyer approached me, an older man named Anthony, impeccable black suit, worn leather briefcase. "Dr. Teresa," he said in a soft but formal voice. "Mr. Robert left specific instructions. I need to meet with you privately as soon as possible. There are urgent matters to discuss." My mother overheard part of the conversation. "Matters? What matters? We are the family. Whatever Dad left concerns all of us." Anthony looked at her with a neutral, professional expression. "Mrs. Marilyn, I respect your position. However, Mr. Robert was very clear. I must first meet with Dr. Teresa privately. Afterwards, there will be a formal reading of the will for the entire family." Matthew approached, with that way of his, of invading personal space. "This is ridiculous. What secrets could Grandpa have with Teresa? She barely visited him." That lie hit me like a slap. I had spent more time with Grandfather in his last years than my entire family combined. But I didn't answer. Not at the funeral. Not that day. "We will meet tomorrow," I told Anthony, "in my hospital office, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon." That night, I took the envelope out of my safe, still sealed, still with my name in Grandfather's handwriting. I ran my fingers over the letters, feeling the texture of the thick paper. "What did you leave for me, Grandpa?" I whispered in my empty apartment. "What is this justice you spoke of?" The meeting with Anthony was revealing in ways I never imagined. He arrived with 3 briefcases full of documents. He sat across from my desk. He refused the coffee I offered him. He got straight to the point. "Dr. Teresa, your grandfather loved you deeply. That must be clear from the start. Everything he did was because he considered you the only person worthy of his legacy." "What do you mean by legacy?" Anthony opened the first briefcase. He pulled out a green folder. Mr. Robert was a very intelligent man, very observant. For decades, he watched how your family treated you. He watched how his son Elias and daughter-in-law Marilyn favored Matthew over you. He watched every injustice, every slight, every moment they made you feel invisible. My throat closed up. Hearing those words out loud, validated by someone else, was almost too much. "He also observed," Anthony continued, "how you built yourself up without anyone's help, how you became an exceptional surgeon, a successful woman, someone who makes a real difference in the world. And he decided that when he passed away, his fortune should go into the right hands." He opened the folder. Inside was a will 40 pages long, each sheet sealed and signed by notaries. "Mr. Robert leaves you the entirety of his estate," he said without emotion in his voice, as if reading the weather. $3,200,000 in bank accounts and securities. The house where he lived, valued at $850,000. His art collection, approximately $200,000. All his personal belongings, including his medical library, which he knows you will appreciate. I was paralyzed. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process what I was hearing. That's more than $4 million, I finally managed to say. $4,300,000, to be exact. To your parents, he leaves $100,000 each. To your brother Matthew, $10,000. And a letter. A letter. Anthony pulled out a smaller envelope. To be delivered to Matthew during the formal reading of the will, Mr. Robert was very specific. He wanted his grandson to hear certain truths. My hands trembled when I took the copy of the will. Page after page of legal language, which essentially said the same thing. Teresa receives everything. Teresa is the sole heir. Teresa is the one who deserves the fruit of a lifetime of work. Is this legal? They can challenge it. Anthony smiled for the first time. "Doctor, Mr. Robert and I worked on this will for 3 years. It is legally ironclad in every possible way. We had it reviewed by 5 other specialized lawyers. Your family can try to challenge it, but I assure you they will lose time and money." Why did he do this? I understand he loved me, but this is going to destroy my family. With all due respect, Doctor, your family destroyed itself decades ago. Mr. Robert simply ensured that justice was served. Besides, there is more. More? How could there be more? Anthony opened the second briefcase. "Mr. Robert hired me 2 years ago to investigate your grandson Matthew's finances. What we discovered is concerning." He pulled out another folder. It was red. Inside were bank statements, loan documents, transaction records. Matthew currently owes $320,000 to various creditors. Credit cards, personal loans, failed business debts. He has been evading creditors for years, moving between questionable legal schemes. The house where he lives has a second mortgage that your parents are unaware of. It is 3 months away from foreclosure. I looked at the documents with horror and fascination. My brother, the family prince, was financially ruined. Mr. Robert knew that Matthew would eventually try to ask the family for more money, especially after his death, when he expected to inherit a considerable sum. This is the reason why the will is the way it is. Mr. Robert did not want his money, earned with effort for decades, to be wasted paying the debts of a man who never learned responsibility. Do my parents know this, about Matthew's debts? No, Matthew has been very careful to hide it. But eventually everything comes to light. Anthony closed the red folder. He looked me directly in the eyes. Dr. Teresa, your grandfather gave me one last instruction. He asked me to tell you this verbatim. Don't be afraid of the storm that is coming. You are stronger than all of them put together. And when they try to make you feel guilty, remember every time they made you feel invisible. Remember who was there when you had nothing. Tears finally fell. I cried in my office in front of a lawyer I barely knew. I cried for the grandfather who loved me so much that he prepared my defense even after his death. I cried for the girl I was and who never received what she deserved. The formal reading of the will was 5 days later. My parents, Matthew, Paige, and I met in Anthony's offices. The atmosphere was tense but cordial. Everyone was waiting to hear how grandfather's inheritance would be divided. Marilyn wore an elegant black dress and a pearl necklace. Elias wore his best suit. Matthew and Paige arrived holding hands, he with a confident expression, she with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Anthony began to read. The first paragraphs were legal formalities. Then he got to the figures. To my son, Elias, I leave the sum of $100,000, with the hope that he understands that money does not replace presence. Dad nodded, satisfied. $100,000 was a considerable sum. To my daughter-in-law, Marilyn, I leave the sum of $100,000, with the request that she reflect on what it truly means to be a mother. Mum frowned slightly at the second part, but the money seemed to soften any offence. To my grandson Matthew, I leave the sum of $10,000. The silence was absolute. Matthew straightened up in his chair. 10,000? Only 10,000? Anthony continued as if he hadn't heard. And a letter, which I will now proceed to read according to the testator's instructions. He pulled out a paper in grandfather's handwriting. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Matthew, I have watched you for 42 years. I have seen you waste opportunity after opportunity. I have seen you take your parents' money without gratitude or shame. I have seen you treat your sister with contempt when she surpasses you in every way. The $10,000 is more than you have honestly earned in your life. Matthew stood up violently. The chair fell backward with a crash. This is a joke. It has to be a damn joke. Anthony raised a hand. Please, Mr. Matthew, sit down. I have not finished reading yet. I will not sit down. This will is a fraud. My grandfather was senile. Someone manipulated him. Sir, Mr. Robert was evaluated by 3 different psychiatrists during the drafting of this will. All certified that he was in full use of his mental faculties. If you wish to contest, you are within your rights, but I warn you that you will lose. Paige touched Matthew's arm. Honey, sit down. Let's listen to everything. He picked up the chair. He dropped into it. His jaw clenched, the veins in his neck visible. My mother looked pale. My father looked at the floor. Anthony continued reading the letter. I have observed how your sister Teresa built her life with her own hands, without help, without privilege, without the money cushion you always had. She is everything you could have been if you had chosen effort over entitlement. For this reason, And because she is the only person in this family who understands the value of work and dignity, I leave Teresa the totality of my remaining estate. What? Marilyn finally spoke. Totality? How much is the totality? Approximately $4,300,000 plus properties and assets, Anthony replied. Chaos erupted. Matthew shouted that this was unfair, that I had manipulated grandfather, that he was going to sue until he took everything from me. Paige tried to calm him down, but her eyes shot daggers at me. My mother was crying, not out of sadness, but out of indignation. My father looked at me as if I had committed a crime. Teresa, Elias said, his voice trembling with contained rage. What did you do to Grandpa? How did you convince him of this? I didn't do anything, I replied with a calm I didn't feel. I didn't even know about this until 5 days ago. Liar, Matthew shouted. You were always a manipulator. You always wanted to be better than me. I never had to want to be, Matthew. I simply am. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. But it was true. The truth that I had lived all my life without daring to say out loud. Matthew lunged towards me. Anthony stepped in between us. Sir, I ask you to control yourself, or I will have to call security. This is not going to stand, Matthew hissed. I'm going to challenge this will. I'm going to prove you manipulated him. I'm going to destroy you. Try it, I said, standing up. But before you start a legal battle that you cannot win and cannot afford, you should know that Grandpa also investigated your finances. I know about the $320,000 of debt. I know about the second mortgage. I know everything, Matthew. His face lost all colour. Paige looked at him confused. What is she talking about? What second mortgage? Shut up, Teresa, Matthew said in a low, dangerous voice. Why should I shut up? Why have I always had to shut up? You people have lived in a fantasy for decades, pretending that Matthew is successful when in reality he is a financial failure who has only survived thanks to our parents' money. Marilyn stood up. Enough. I will not allow you to speak about your brother like that. He has worked hard. He has tried to build businesses. Not all of us are lucky enough to have your stable job. Luck. The laugh that came out of me sounded bitter even to my own ears. You think it was luck? I studied for years while Matthew partied. I worked 36-hour shifts while he slept until noon. I built a career while you gave him everything. It wasn't luck, Mum. It was sacrifice. Something none of you understand. You are ungrateful, my mother said with venom in her voice. After everything we've done for you. What have you done for me? What, exactly? Tell me one thing. One single thing that you've done for me that you haven't done double for Matthew. Silence. A deafening silence that answered my question better than any word. That's what I thought, I said, picking up my purse. Anthony, send me the papers I need to sign. I'm leaving. Teresa, my father finally spoke, don't destroy this family over money. I stopped at the door. I turned around. I'm not destroying it, Dad. You did that decades ago. Grandfather Robert just made sure there were consequences. I walked out of that office. I didn't look back. The calls started that same night. My mother, my father. Even Matthew tried with a falsely conciliatory tone. Everyone wanted to talk, to reconcile, to find a fair solution. I ignored every call. I blocked their numbers. I needed space to process everything. I had expected to inherit something from grandfather. Maybe $50,000, maybe $100,000. I never imagined this. I never imagined he would leave me everything. The following months were strange. I signed papers, transferred properties, consolidated bank accounts. Grandfather's house was now legally mine. His medical books filled 3 complete bookshelves in my apartment. His art collection hung on my walls. But the most valuable thing was not the money or the properties. It was the validation. It was knowing that someone had seen me, had valued me, had considered me worthy. Grandfather Robert had given me something that money could not buy. The confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that the injustices I had lived were real. Matthew tried to contest the will, as he had threatened. The process lasted 6 weeks before his lawyer told him it was hopeless. He had spent $15,000 of the $10,000 he inherited, plus $5,000 borrowed, on legal fees for nothing. My parents stopped calling after 3 months. I suppose they finally understood that I wasn't going to share the inheritance, that grandfather's money was not available to bail Matthew out of his endless debts. A year passed, then 2. My life continued. Surgeries, conferences, patients saved. Grandfather's inheritance was wisely invested, generating returns I didn't even need because my salary was already more than enough. I thought about starting a foundation, something to honor grandfather's memory, but I wanted to wait for the right moment. I wanted it to mean something more than just money. And then, 2.5 years after the will reading, I received a call from Paige. Teresa. Her voice sounded sweet, almost friendly. I know it's been years since we spoke. I know things ended badly. But Matthew and I wanted to extend an olive branch. We want to invite you to dinner. At our house. An intimate family dinner. Just us, your parents, you, to try and heal. Every instinct told me to refuse, that this was a trap, that after years of silence, this sudden kindness couldn't be genuine. But a part of me, that part that was still the girl who longed for her family's love, wanted to believe that maybe they had changed, that maybe they had reflected, that maybe they were ready to truly see me. When would the dinner be? I asked cautiously. This Saturday. Nothing formal. Just a family get-together. We've been doing a lot of thinking, Teresa. Matthew has realized a lot of things. He's matured. We really want to rebuild the bridges that were broken. There was something in her tone that didn't quite convince me. Too rehearsed, too perfect, as if she had practiced every word in front of the mirror. Let me think about it, I replied. Of course. I'll send you the address by text. I sincerely hope you come. It would be important for everyone, especially for Matthew. She hung up before I could reply. The message arrived 3 minutes later. The address was the same house where they had always lived. At least they hadn't moved. At least the second mortgage hadn't destroyed them yet. I spent the next few days debating with myself. My rational side screamed that this was a bad idea, that after years of silence, a sudden invitation couldn't mean anything good, that they probably wanted to ask me for money in some elaborate way. But my emotional side, the one I never managed to completely kill, whispered that maybe I deserved to give them a chance. That maybe 2.5 years had been enough time for reflection. That maybe, finally, we could have something resembling a functional family. Have you ever wanted something to be true so badly that you ignore all the warning signs? Saturday arrived. I dressed carefully. I chose a beige dress, elegant but not ostentatious. I didn't want to look like I was showing off my success. But I didn't want to look weak either. The balance was delicate. I drove to their house with sweaty hands on the steering wheel. The house looked the same as always. Well-kept yard, fresh, sand-coloured paint. 2 cars in the driveway. One was Matthew's, old but functional. The other I didn't recognise. Probably my parents'. I rang the doorbell. Paige opened it with a wide smile. She wore a lavender dress, her hair perfectly styled as always. Teresa, what a joy that you came. Come in, come in. The interior of the house smelled of home-cooked food. Roast chicken, if I wasn't mistaken. The dining table was elegantly set. White tablecloth, candles, wine glasses, too elegant for a simple, casual family dinner. My parents were already sitting in the living room. My mother wore a dark green dress and jewelry I hadn't seen before. My father wore a dress shirt and slacks. Everyone was dressed as if this were an important event. Teresa, my mother stood up and hugged me. A stiff, awkward hug. That lasted exactly 2 seconds. You look well. A little thin, maybe. Are you eating enough? The criticism disguised as concern. Classic. I'm perfectly fine, Mum. Matthew entered from the kitchen with a bottle of wine. He looked different, thinner, with pronounced dark circles under his eyes. Some grey hairs I didn't remember. The last few years hadn't been kind to him. Sister, he said, with what seemed to be a genuine smile. Thanks for coming. It means a lot to us. Thanks for the invitation, I replied automatically, still alert. Dinner began with light conversation. The weather, the news, unimportant anecdotes. Paige served the chicken with elaborate sides. Everything tasted good. I had to admit it. They had put effort into the food. But there was something strange in the atmosphere. An underlying tension. Glances exchanged between Matthew and Paige. Smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. My mother nervously touching her necklace every few minutes. Teresa, my father began while cutting his chicken. We've been doing a lot of thinking about the past. About how we handled things when you were kids. Here it came. The prepared speech. We recognize that maybe we weren't as equitable as we should have been, Marilyn continued. That perhaps we favored Matthew in ways that weren't fair to you. Perhaps. As if they still couldn't fully admit it. We've grown, Matthew added. I've grown. I've had time to reflect on my behavior, on how I treated you, and I want to apologize. Truly, Teresa. I was an idiot, a terrible brother. The words sounded correct. The tone seemed sincere, but something in my gut told me it wasn't, that this was a carefully orchestrated performance. I appreciate the apology, I said neutrally. What we want, Paige leaned forward with her most charming smile, is to rebuild our family relationship, to start over, to leave the past behind. And to do that, Matthew took a sip of wine, we thought it might be good to do something together, as a family. A project that unites us. There it was. I knew there had to be something more. What kind of project? I asked. Well, Matthew exchanged a look with Paige. I've been developing a new business idea, an integrated medicine clinic. It would combine traditional treatments with alternative therapies. It would be revolutionary. And I thought that you, with your medical experience and your connections— You want me to invest in your business? I interrupted him. It's not just my business. It would be our business. The family's. We would all put something in. You would have a significant percentage. It would be a way to honor grandfather's memory, using his inheritance for something that helps people. There it was, the real reason for this dinner. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted my money, Grandfather Robert's money that hurt them so much that I had it. How much do you need? I asked directly. Matthew cleared his throat. Well, to start, we would need around $300,000. But it would be a solid investment. I've done all the research. The profit margins in this sector are incredible. $300,000. Coincidentally. Almost exactly the amount of his debts, according to the documents Anthony had shown me years ago. I see, I said, taking a sip of water. You don't have to decide now, Paige added quickly. We just want you to consider the possibility, as a way to unite us as a family. And we recognize, my father spoke again, that you have worked very hard for your money, that grandfather left it to you because he trusted you. But I also believe he would have wanted the family to remain united. They were using grandfather Robert as an emotional tool, the same grandfather who had explicitly written in his will because he didn't trust Matthew with the money. I looked around the table, at my mother with her hopeful expression, at my father nodding as if this made perfect sense, at Paige with her rehearsed smile, at Matthew trying to appear vulnerable and reformed, and something inside me broke. Not out of sadness, but out of final clarity. No, I said simply. The word fell onto the table like a stone into still water. The silence that followed was dense, heavy. No, Matthew repeated, as if he hadn't heard correctly. I'm not going to invest in your business. I'm not going to give you $300,000 to pay off your debts, disguised as a business opportunity. And I'm not going to participate in this charade of family reconciliations that you obviously organized just to access grandfather's inheritance. The masks began to fall. Paige's smile hardened. Matthew's eyes narrowed. My mother let out an exasperated sigh. Teresa, you are misunderstanding everything, Matthew said with a tense voice. This is not about money. It's about family. Really, then explain why in 2.5 years I didn't receive a single call, not a message, nothing. And suddenly, when you need $300,000, I'm your dear sister again. Don't be dramatic, my mother intervened. We called you many times after the will. You were the one who ignored us. You called to demand that I share the inheritance, to tell me it was unfair, to make me feel guilty for something I didn't decide. You never called to ask me how I was. You never called just to talk. You only wanted the money. The money that should have been the whole family's, Matthew spat. The words came out with venom. My grandfather was senile when he made that will. You manipulated him. Your grandfather was more lucid than you have been your entire life, and you know it. That's why you couldn't win the contestation. Because 3 psychiatrists certified he was completely sane. You were always his favorite, Matthew continued, his voice rising in volume. He always treated you like you were special, like you were better than all of us. He treated me with basic respect, something you never did. That's not favoritism, Matthew. That's the minimum a human being deserves, basic respect. Matthew laughed bitterly. You always thought you were better than us, always looking down, judging us with your perfect career and your perfect life. My life isn't perfect, but I built it myself. Without anyone's help except Grandpa, who only gave me emotional support, not money. Everything I have I earned with my own effort. Can you say the same, Matthew? He stood up abruptly. The chair scraped against the floor. I'm sick of your holier-than-thou attitude. I'm sick of you acting like you're a victim. You had the same opportunities as me. The same opportunities. I stood up as well. Were you given $100,000 for your education? No, because it was paid for entirely. Were you bought a car at 18? Yes. Me? No. Were you financially supported until you were 40 years old? Yes. Me? Never. We didn't have the same opportunities, Matthew. You had privilege after privilege, and you wasted them all. Because I never had the natural talent you have, he finally shouted. Because I'm not a genius like you. Some of us are just normal people. And there it was. The truth that had been hidden under years of arrogance and overcompensation. It wasn't that Matthew thought he was better than me. It was that he knew he wasn't. And he couldn't stand it. You don't need to be a genius to be responsible, I said more calmly. You don't need to be brilliant to be grateful for what you are given. You don't need exceptional talent to treat your family with basic respect. Respect. Paige joined in, her voice high-pitched, full of indignation. You want to talk about respect? You came here tonight with your air of superiority. Judging us from your high pedestal, you didn't come willing to reconcile. You came to rub your success in our faces. I came because I was invited under the pretense of reconciliation. I came to give you a chance that, frankly, you didn't deserve. And what I found was exactly what I expected. A financial ambush disguised as a family scene. You are selfish, my mother said in an icy voice. Grandfather would be disappointed to see what you've become. A bitter woman who refuses to help her own family. Those words hit me, but not the way she expected. They hit me with the final clarity that no matter what I did, it would never be enough for them. I could give them all the money in the world, and they would still find something to criticize. Grandfather would be proud, I replied firmly, because I did exactly what he taught me, to value myself. Not to allow myself to be used, to understand that family is not just blood, it's mutual respect. Then leave, Matthew said, approaching me with heavy steps. If you despise us so much, get out of our house. Gladly. I took my purse from the back of the chair. But before I could take a step, Matthew did something I didn't see coming. He grabbed the plate of hot chili that was in front of him, still steaming because it had just been served as a second course, and he turned it over onto my head. The scalding liquid burned my scalp. I felt it slide down my face, down my neck, soaking my beige dress. Pieces of vegetables fell onto my shoulders. The pain was intense, but the shock was worse. 20 pairs of eyes were staring at me, because we weren't alone. There were other people in the house, friends of Matthew and Paige who had been in the adjoining room, supposedly to arrive later, but who had clearly been there the whole time. Listening. You have 10 minutes to get out of my house, Matthew said with a theatrical voice, pointing to the door. His face was red with rage. The veins in his neck were throbbing. 10 minutes to get out of my family. Forever. The silence was absolute. No one moved. No one protested. My parents remained seated, looking at their plates. They said nothing in my defense. They did nothing to stop their son. And then Paige started to applaud. Slowly at first. Then louder, as if her husband had just done something admirable. The guests in the adjoining room joined the applause that resonated in my ears like a funeral bell. I wiped my face with the napkin I still held in my hand. I took a deep breath. 67 years of humiliation had culminated in this moment. But I was no longer the invisible girl. I was no longer the woman who accepted slights in silence. I reached into my black leather purse, my purse that I always carried with me, where I kept important things, where, for some reason I couldn't fully explain, I had brought certain documents tonight, as if a part of me had known I would need them. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. I threw it onto the table with such force that the wine glasses trembled. The documents scattered among the dirty plates and the candles that were still burning. That's right, I said, with a calmness that surprised even myself. 10 minutes, and everything that is yours will be gone. Matthew's smile wavered, just for a moment. But I saw it. I saw the fear cross his eyes before he could hide it. What is this? Paige asked, picking up one of the documents. That, I said, wiping another piece of ground beef from my cheek, is Grandfather Robert's will. In case you've forgotten it, read it out loud, Paige. The part where he explains exactly why Matthew only received $10,000. We all know the will, Matthew growled. But your guests don't. I pointed towards the adjoining room where the friends were still silently observing. Didn't you want an audience for my humiliation? Well, now they're going to hear the whole story. I pulled out another document. This is a detailed financial report of your debts, Matthew. $320,000. Did you tell Paige about the second mortgage on this house? Did you tell her you're 2 months away from losing everything? Paige turned to her husband with wide eyes. What is she talking about? She's lying, Matthew said, but his voice trembled. I'm not lying, and I can prove it. I pulled out another paper. This is the second mortgage document, signed by you 18 months ago. $75,000 at 25% annual interest. A predatory loan you accepted because no real bank would lend you money. The color drained from Paige's face. She took the document with trembling hands. She began to read it. Her eyes moved quickly over the lines, and with every second that passed, her expression hardened more. Matthew, this is real. Her voice was barely a whisper, but loaded with contained fury. Paige, let me explain, he began. You mortgaged our house without telling me? $75,000? What did you spend that money on? But I wasn't finished. I pulled out another document, then another, then another. I scattered them over the table like cards in a poker game where I had the winning hand. This is a $30,000 loan you took using false information about your income. It's technically fraud. This other one is for a credit card that has been in collection for 8 months. Here is a lawsuit from a former business partner who says you stole $45,000 from him. I continued. Matthew tried to snatch the papers from me, but I moved faster. Years of surgery had perfected my reflexes. Don't touch me, I said in an icy voice. You already burned me with chili. If you lay a hand on me again, I will call the police. And believe me, with all these fraud documents, they would love to talk to you. He stopped, breathing heavily like a bull about to charge. But wait, I continued, enjoying every second of watching his world fall apart. There's more, because Grandfather Robert didn't just investigate your finances. He left me specific instructions on what to do with certain information. I pulled out a different folder. It was dark green. Do you remember those investors who lost money in your consulting company 5 years ago? The ones who accepted an out-of-court settlement paid for by our parents? Teresa, don't you dare, Matthew said in a dangerously low voice. It turns out that one of those investors was a personal friend of Grandpa's. And when he found out what had happened, he contacted others who were also scammed by you. There are 6 people in total who lost a combined $230,000 from your false promises. That was already legally resolved, my father intervened, finally finding his voice. It was resolved with a non-disclosure agreement that forced the victims not to speak publicly about the case. But that agreement has a clause. If Matthew commits fraud again, the agreement is nullified and they can proceed with criminal charges. The silence in the room was so dense it could be cut with a knife. And guess what I discovered 3 months ago, I continued. Matthew has been operating another consulting company under a different name, using the exact same scheme. Promising impossible results, charging up front, and disappearing when clients ask for explanations. There are already 4 new victims. You're lying, Matthew said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm not lying. I have sworn declarations. I have emails. I have contracts signed by you with promises you knew you couldn't keep. And best of all, I took out my phone and held it up. I recorded this entire conversation, including the part where you physically assaulted me in front of witnesses. Paige dropped the document she was holding. Her face had gone from shock and fury to something resembling horror. Who are you? She asked Matthew. Who the hell are you really? Paige, listen to me. He tried to grab her arm, but she pulled away violently. Don't touch me, don't come near me. I turned to my parents, who were still sitting like pillars of salt. And you too? Are you going to keep defending him? Are you going to keep paying his debts while he destroys life after life with his frauds? My mother had tears in her eyes, but I didn't know if they were of sadness or rage. Teresa, he is your brother. Family supports each other. Family supports each other when there is mutual love and respect. What you have done is not support. It is complicity. You have allowed him to become a criminal because you never forced him to face consequences. I'm not going to stay here and listen to this, Matthew said, heading for the door. Sit down. My voice cut through the air like a whip, and to my surprise, he stopped, because I haven't gotten to the best part yet. I pulled out the final document, the most important of all. I held it up so everyone could see it. Do you know what I did with part of grandfather's inheritance, Matthew? I bought your debts. Time seemed to stop. What? He whispered. 6 months ago, I started contacting your creditors. I offered to buy your debts at a discount. Most were delighted to accept because they thought they would never see that money. I spent $180,000 buying $290,000 of your total debt. Matthew's legs seemed to fail him. He grabbed the back of a chair, which means, I continued relentlessly, that I am now your primary creditor. I control whether I execute the mortgages. I decide whether to initiate legal proceedings. I have the power to destroy you financially with a single phone call. You can't do that, my father said, standing up. That is vindictive. It is cruel. Cruel? I laughed without humor. You want to talk about cruelty? Where were you when Matthew poured scalding chili on my head? Where was your indignation when he gave me 10 minutes to get out of his family? Where has your concern been for 67 years of treating me like garbage? You were always resentful, my mother spat, always holding grudges, counting slights. They're not slights when they're real. It's not a grudge when it's memory. For decades you made me believe that the problem was me. That if I were just more compliant, quieter, more invisible, maybe you would love me. But the problem was never me. It was you, your inability to love someone who didn't feed your ego. Your inability to see value in something you couldn't control. I turned to Matthew, who was still clinging to the chair, his face green with panic. But I'm not cruel like you, I continued. I'm not going to execute the debts immediately. I'm going to give you an option. A chance that is more than you have ever given me. What do you want? He asked with a hoarse voice. I want you to go to every one of your recent victims and give them back their money. I want you to shut down that fraudulent company. I want you to find a real job with an honest salary and pay your debts to me in reasonable installments over the next 10 years. That's impossible, he whispered. It's not impossible. It's difficult. There's a difference. And if you have truly matured, as you said half an hour ago, if you really want to change, then you will do it. Because the alternative is for me to make all this evidence of fraud public. Contact the previous victims to nullify the non-disclosure agreement and let justice run its course. Would you go to jail? Paige added, looking at her husband with a mixture of horror and disgust. Could you go to jail for fraud? She's lying, Matthew said desperately. She's making all this up. She has no real proof. I have 37 pages of evidence, reviewed by 3 different lawyers. Everything is documented, dated, verified. And before you ask, yes, I made copies, multiple copies, in different locations. You can't make them disappear. I watched as reality finally penetrated his brain, as he understood that this time there would be no rescue, that Mum and Dad couldn't pay to make this problem disappear, that he had reached the end of the road. Why? He finally asked. And for the first time in my life, I heard something resembling genuine vulnerability in his voice. Just for revenge? No, I answered honestly. I did it because someone had to stop you. I did it because every day that passed you were ruining more lives. I did it because Grandfather Robert taught me that when you have power, you have the responsibility to use it to protect the defenseless. Matthew's victims are defenseless, I continued. People who trusted him, who gave him their hard-earned money, who believed his promises, and he betrayed them again and again. Someone had to stop him. And if his own family wouldn't do it, then I would. I looked at my watch. 8 minutes have passed of the 10 you gave me. So here is my final ultimatum. And pay close attention because I will not repeat it. I walked around the table, still with chili dripping from my hair, but with my head held high. Every step was deliberate, powerful. You have 72 hours to contact every victim of your latest scheme and return their money. I don't care where you get it. Sell everything if necessary. Borrow from whoever you want. But those people will recover every cent you stole from them. I don't have that money, Matthew said weakly. Then get it. Sell your car. Sell Paige's jewelry. Sell everything you have of value. Because if in 72 hours you have not begun the restitution process, I will hand all this evidence over to the district attorney. Paige stood up abruptly. I am not going to sell my things to pay for his frauds. This is too much. I'm done with this. She took off her wedding ring. She threw it onto the table. It bounced twice and fell to the floor with a metallic clink. Paige, wait. Matthew tried to follow her, but she was already picking up her purse. No, I've put up with your lies for years, your empty promises, your failed businesses, but fraud, real victims, the possibility of jail. I am not going down with you, Matthew. Call a lawyer. You're going to need one for the divorce, too. She left the house, leaving the door open. The sound of her car starting echoed in the silence she left behind. Matthew slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. For the first time in his life, he seemed truly defeated. There was no ego, no arrogance, just a 45-year-old man finally facing the consequences of decades of irresponsibility. But that's not all, I continued mercilessly. I still had 2 minutes of the 10 he had given me. This house, the house where you ordered me to leave in 10 minutes, do you know who it really belongs to? Matthew slowly raised his head. When you bought this house 13 years ago, Mum and Dad gave you $150,000 for the down payment. You took out a mortgage for the rest. But you were never able to maintain the payments consistently. You refinanced 3 times. You took that second mortgage. And 4 months ago, when you were about to lose it, someone paid off all your mortgage debts. I pulled out the last document, a deed. It was me. I paid $310,000 to settle your mortgages. And as part of the agreement with the bank, the house was transferred to my name. This house, Matthew, is no longer yours. It is mine. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the guests in the adjoining room, who had been watching this drama as if it were a play, held their breath. You can't, my mother whispered. You can't take away his house. It's no longer his house. It's my house. And I have every legal right to ask him to leave. In fact, I looked at my watch again. I told him that in 10 minutes, everything that was his would be gone. 9.5 minutes have passed. Teresa, please, my father spoke with a broken voice. He's your brother. You can't leave him on the street. I can't. He had no problem ordering me out of his family after burning me with scalding chili. Why should I show him more mercy than he showed me? I crouched down to meet Matthew's eyes, who was still sitting with an expression of complete shock. But unlike you, I am not cruel without reason. So here's the deal. You can stay in this house, my house, for 6 months. 6 months to get a real job, to start paying your debts, to straighten out your life. The rent will be $2,000 monthly. Fair market price. If you pay on time, if you fulfill your obligations, if you truly show that you have changed, then in 1 year I will consider selling the house back to you at the price I paid for it. Without interest. And if I can't pay, he asked with a hollow voice, then you will have to move out, and the house will be sold to the highest bidder. Those are the rules that the real world follows, Matthew. The same rules that the rest of us have always followed. Welcome to reality. I stood up straight. I headed towards the door, but before leaving, I turned around one last time towards my parents. And you two, Marilyn, Elias. I want you to know something. For 67 years, I sought your approval, your love, your recognition. I killed myself studying, working, building myself up, thinking that someday you would truly see me, that someday you would say you were proud of me. Tears ran down my cheeks, mixing with the remains of chili, but they were not tears of sadness. They were of liberation. But Grandfather Robert taught me something crucial before he died. He taught me that love and respect cannot be begged for. They cannot be earned with achievements. Either they are given freely, or they are not worth having, and you never gave it to me freely. I always had to fight for crumbs while Matthew received banquets without doing anything. Teresa, please, my mother was sobbing now. Don't destroy this family. I didn't destroy it, Mum. You destroyed it decades ago when you decided that one child was worth more than the other. When you chose ego over fairness. When you preferred the comfort of lies over the discomfort of the truth. I am just naming what always existed. I pulled a smaller envelope from my purse. I placed it on the table. This is for you. They are 2 checks, one for each of you, for $50,000. It is more than you gave Grandfather in his life, more than you invested in my education, more than you ever acknowledged my existence. Take it as my last contribution to this family. We don't want your money, my father said with wounded pride. Of course you want it. You have wanted it since the moment you knew about the inheritance. That's why you organized this dinner. That's why you invited me after years of silence. So take it. But know this. It's the last thing you will ever receive from me. After today, you do not exist to me. There will be no more calls. There will be no more dinners. There will be no more opportunities. I walked towards the door. I stopped on the threshold. Grandfather Robert was right about everything. He told me that someday you would want to boast that I am your daughter. That you would want to tell the world that the famous Dr. Teresa is your family. And when that day came, I should remember who was there when I wasn't famous. That day has already arrived. In the last few years, I have been interviewed on national programs. I have saved lives that other doctors considered lost. I have been offered positions at hospitals in 3 different countries. And every time someone asks me about my family, you know what I say? I say that my grandfather was the best man I ever knew, and then I change the subject. Because you do not deserve to be part of my success story. The 10 minutes were up. I looked at my watch one last time. My 10 minutes are over, and indeed, Everything that was yours is gone. Your son lost his house, his wife, his false image of success. You lost your daughter. Not because I am cruel, but because I finally understood what grandfather tried to teach me, that my worth does not depend on your recognition. I walked out of that house with my head held high, with chili still dripping from my hair, but with the lightest heart I had felt in decades. I heard sobs behind me, but I didn't look back. There was nothing there worth keeping. 3 years have passed since that night. Matthew complied with the ultimatum. He returned the money to his victims, selling everything he had of value. He got a job in sales, nothing glamorous, but honest. He pays his rent on time every month. He still has 7 years left to pay off his debt to me, but at least he's trying. Paige got divorced. She moved to another city. My parents tried to contact me several times during the first year. I ignored every call, every message, every letter. Eventually, they stopped trying. And I, with part of Grandfather Robert's inheritance, created the Robert Foundation for Young Doctors. We grant full scholarships to medical students who come from unsupportive families, who have to build themselves up alone, who are invisible in their own homes. In 3 years, we have helped 47 students fulfill their dreams. Every time I hand out a scholarship, I see Grandfather Robert in their eyes. I see the gratitude, the determination, the fire that cannot be put out. And I know he would be proud. Because in the end, true family is not the one that shares your blood. It's the one that recognizes your worth, celebrates your achievements, and supports you in your falls. It's the one that sees you when you are invisible to everyone else. Grandfather Robert was my true family. And now, these 47 students and the hundreds who will come after, they are my family too. A family that I built myself, based on mutual respect and genuine love. Do you realize? Sometimes the family you need is not the one you were given at birth. It's the one you choose to build when you finally understand your own worth. Blood yells, but respect whispers. And it lasts longer.